Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to our second channel geography video. This is an episode series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today I wanted to talk about every single country that has joined the European Union in reverse chronological order of when they did join. And the reason I figured I'd do this today is because I've been talking about the EU a fair amount in previous videos. You can imagine when I make a lot of European-centered geography videos, it comes up from time to time, given that over half of European countries are in the EU. However, whenever you mention the EU in any video, or even when it's literally just in the thumbnail, you get a lot of people to come to the video to come and express their views on the EU. You know, it's a big subject, I kind of get it. There's a lot more anti-EU, comments being like really vocally angry about it, but there's some pro-EU stuff there too, where people just, get angry, talk about their opinions unrelated to the video. I guess that's fine, but where I kind of draw the line, and I feel like it's gone a step too far, is that some people see the mere creation of a video which mentions the EU. I just said, oh, these 5 things happen to be all within the EU, but that's just like a, happy coincidence. People are like, by mentioning things that happen to be in the EU, you are supporting the EU SSR. By not being very much against it at every single point and every single mention, you are supporting the deaths of millions, and it's like, whoa there, dude. Not every single mention of a thing that you don't like politically has to be mentioning how bad it is. And second of all, if you think that facts are the things that are going to destroy your argument, if by learning anything about it that isn't negative is going to destroy you, maybe you need to get a set of beliefs that is actually based on facts. And because of that, I figured why not talk about every single European Union country when they join, and rather than going on a hugely pro-EU bent, I'm actually quite a Eurosceptic person, I figured let's actually dive into the nitty-gritty of how things are more complex than, good, bad, that you want to believe when you hear about just the broadest strokes of things, because every EU country has a slightly different perspective, like the first country, or rather the last country to join the EU, because Croatia is the most recent applicant to the EU. They joined, by the way, here's all the member states in case you're curious. It looks nice on a map, but Croatia is the most recent entrant. They joined in 2013 as the 28th member state to join the EU. So yeah, Croatia is a pretty interesting country because, the thing they're most widely known for is the tourism thing, right? They had a huge dip in tourism because of the big Yugoslav wars, and the dip from that was pretty huge, but then the bounce back has been even bigger, like tourism in Croatia kind of like, they just go one on one together, right? Like, oh yeah, of course that's where you go. An interesting thing about it that I didn't realize till I looked into the official statistics though, is just how weighted the tourism in Croatia actually is from Germany. So you might find that interesting if you're like, oh yeah, so Germany, EU stuff, and then since Croatia joined the EU, German tourists to Croatia has just gone hugely up. However, also interesting to note is the fact that Croatia has held the most recent referendum on joining the EU. They had a referendum before they joined, and 66% of people actually voted in favour. 2/3 majority for joining the EU. Maybe you find that interesting, Again, like I said, I'm not like even pro-EU here. It's just like, oh, what do you know? Some people voted. Why not think about how or why that is? And there's a thing for your head. Maybe just think because the EU is inherently good and that's why, or maybe think, oh, the people were tricked by this or that, but at least have a more complex opinion than it's the EU, SSR, and then whatever. Anyway, I'm going to complain about that video. I'm not really. But let's talk about next the previous wave of expansion, because there was a single entrant to the EU in 2013. However, most of the entrants to the EU were kind of done in small batches, like the 2007 batch, which included Romania and Bulgaria. So the cool thing about this batch as a whole is that it kind of linked the previous, because again, if you look at the map of the EU, you can see how without Romania and Bulgaria, there's this just big gap where like Greece is cut off from the rest, and it's been like that for a long time. But Romania and Bulgaria finally mean we have a continuous link between most EU member states besides the islands, and yeah, so that's nice in terms of continuality. However, in terms of the individual member states, we'll talk about Bulgaria first, because Bulgaria has one of the more significant population declines in Europe, which I guess is a bummer, but on the interesting side, at least, again, I would argue maybe not an upside, depends on what you think about the euro. Bulgaria is likely going to be the next country to join the euro, because if you look at, for instance, here's a map of European currencies, you can see how all the countries that don't have the euro, so green is non-euro and light blue is also non-euro. Light blue means they're pegged to the euro, and they're currently in the phase just before introducing the euro. And although it's losing popularity in Bulgaria, it's still close to 50-50 as to whether they'll get the euro or not. Again, time will tell, but they're legally obliged to join the euro. But again, most of the countries on this map are also legally obliged to join the euro. But yeah, just an interesting little thing that, yeah, Bulgaria might be the next country to get the euro. And because of that, if you have a euro note that's from before the last few years, it will only say euro in 2 scripts, in the English script and the Greek script. It's awful to see like this, but for instance, let me just show you. You'll see euro down there on the bottom left of the screen right now. It says it in 2 scripts, but because Greece is joining the euro, it's going to have to go to 3 scripts. So maybe you find that interesting. Speaking of maybe finding things interesting, Romania is a country which has the highest home ownership rate in Europe. That's kind of cool, right? A lot of corruption stuff going on these days, which is, again, well beyond the remit of this video. So we'll just talk about the fact that Bucharest is the 6th biggest city in Europe. I find that fascinating because if you look at the biggest cities in Europe, the big 5 European, former powers, they all come like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's London with the United Kingdom, then it's, like France, and then so on and so forth. The big 5 cities in, the UK, France, Germany, Italy, Spain, they've got the 5 biggest cities, but then Romania's over there with number 6, and there's something about that I find immensely cool, and that makes me want to visit Bucharest a lot. Maybe you too. Or maybe the opposite of that. I know a lot of people don't like big cities, but yeah, Romania has the 6th biggest city in the EU, and some of the highest ownership rates in the world. In fact, the highest, I believe, as well as the highest in the European Union. How happy that is. So, before the 2007 wave of expansion into the EU, there was the 2004 wave of expansion into the EU. I thought I wasn't recording. Because in 2004, there was a huge batch of countries, the biggest individual batch they've ever done, because this was, again, after the fall of the fall of the divide in Europe, the Iron Curtain. And basically, 10 countries joined the EU at one time. We'll go from northernmost to southernmost, I guess. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, Slovenia, as well as 2 island countries, or islandish countries, Malta and Cyprus, all joined the EU together. That was 10 entrants to the EU at one time, and the thing about that makes it interesting to me is the just sheer amount that expanded the EU. And in fact, by expanding the EU so much at one time to such a broadly different set of countries is really where a lot of the European Union issues come in. If you look at where the Euroscepticism started, 2004 is a pretty good point where it started to go from like weird, let's call it fringe belief, to kind of mainstream belief. That's where the big parties that you might know kind of started to form and started to have actual electoral successes. Because in 2004, expanding the EU, which had free movement, which had the currency union beginning, all that sort of stuff, to a lot of countries from former Eastern Europe, where there was, of course, like a different standard of living, is where a lot of the disparities and a lot of the, like debates as to whether there should be internal migration kind of come from. And, that's an issue that only really started 14 years ago. It reminds you of how young the EU is, that all of these countries joined just 14 years ago, and now it's just kind of an accepted thing that like, oh yeah, Polish people can live anywhere in the EU, and anyone from the EU can live in Poland. And, with all the countries from Eastern Europe, again, former Eastern Europe technically, specifically, there's kind of that issue where people feel like it's not reciprocal. I just want to mention that because the interesting thing about all these 10 countries joining the EU is that when they did join the EU, it was kind of a move that the US really, really heavily supported because the US couldn't, make a move into NATO because they didn't want to like seem like they were going back on their word to Russia. However, they wanted to integrate, Eastern Europe into Western to kind of protect or whatever, or like to integrate them into their sphere, I guess you could say. But yeah, because of that, the EU was kind of pressured into accepting all of the countries at once. And this is interestingly also why that wave of expansion is not just not liked by anti-immigration people, it's also not liked by pro-Russia people. There's this really weird sect of anti-EU people that I feel uncomfortable at. Again, I would describe myself as quite Eurosceptic, but when you see the people that are pro-Russia, and that's why they don't like the EU, those people make me uncomfortable. Like, why would you have that opinion living in, Europe, like Western Europe? I don't get it in the slightest, but it's kind of a thing where, like, that move was seen as, like, an aggressive expansion into what was previously Russia's territory. Again, Poland was not a USSR republic, but it was in the communist bloc, very much controlled by the USSR. Same with Slovakia, Czechia, or Czechoslovakia as it used to be known. Same with Hungary. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia were literally formally a part of Russia, the USSR, literally just 13 years before that point, just to kind of drive home into you why that's such a big deal, and just keep that in mind as we go forward. So yeah, that is the expansion of the EU. Let's talk about each of the countries individually. And yeah, like I said, just want to finish up that one and say that is why a lot of people who think that, they're pro-Russia is like, that was a big aggressive move into Russia's former turf. So yeah, anyway, let's talk about them one by one. We'll go south to north, because I went north to south to say them. So Cyprus, fun fact about Cyprus, is that it's one of the only, in fact, it's the only EU country to have been occupied, or like, it was occupied before it joined the EU, which is kind of a weird thing, which means there is an electorate of Cyprus that technically is represented by Cyprus in the EU, that do not vote in EU elections, and that is not recognized as like, basically, Cyprus believes it controls the Highland. Every single country in the UN, besides Turkey, believes it controls the Highland, and Turkey believes there is a country called North Cyprus that is separate. And anyway, long story short, Cyprus is the only country that is occupied by the EU. Also, it's one of only a few EU countries. There's a lot of technical borders that actually borders the UK. However, interestingly enough, the part of the UK that is on, this is the Acaptorian Dhekelia. They are both on Cyprus because Cyprus is a former UK colony. However, interestingly enough, these are not parts of the EU, which means there is a Cyprus border with not the EU, and then another Cyprus border with not the EU, and then some more Cyprus non-EU border. It's a very complex situation on Cyprus that I don't understand how you can be partially occupied and have, because all the people who live in this other republic still have free movement within the EU, even though they don't really get to use it. Weird situation with Cyprus. Being occupied makes things a lot more complex, as it turns out. Then we've got Malta over here. So Malta is another former British colony. Again, these are the island countries, I like to call them, because when you look at a map, you always forget about them. Like, you can see, like, on this map, like, where are they at? Oh, they're below the image. So, yeah, long story short, Malta is another small member country. It's actually the smallest by population, and therefore, because there is a minimum number of seats in the European Parliament, I believe it's 6 at present, it might go down eventually, but that means that Malta is the most overrepresented per person, which, you know, that one of the issues, or one of the common themes of every confederation or federation is that small countries or small members always get overrepresented, and Malta benefits from that strongly. Fun fact, by the way, I used to have a Maltese business partner when I was like 13 on the internet, because I used to... I've mentioned the whole business thing before, but yeah, so I've always had a strong opinion of Malta. They speak a lot of English, as well as Italian, as well as Maltese, lots of languages, and I had a guy who was a very nice guy. Anyway, fun fact, let me use his PayPal when PayPal shut mine down. What a good guy, what a good country. But what isn't, actually, I was going to say what isn't a good country, but I like Slovenia a lot too. So Slovenia is an interesting one because it has the shortest coastline of any EU country that does have a coastline. This is the Slovenian coast, and interestingly enough, Slovenia does have a navy. It has 2 ships in the navy, which I find, I don't know if that's a lot or a little. I looked up some big navies and like, it seems small by comparison. And the interesting thing though is like, they have 2 ships and they have a navy because, I mean, they've got a coast, but like the 2 ships don't really have to defend Slovenia a lot. I know most navies aren't doing that on a regular basis, so they deal with like migrant stuff mostly. And I just find it hugely fascinating that, like, you know what, it would have been a lot easier in some ways for Slovenia if they just didn't have a coast, because then you wouldn't have to pay for the navy. And I know, I find that mildly interesting. Maybe you hate me for it, but yeah, also Slovenia is the only country so far that's had like a huge territorial dispute with another one that's had that whole, like, in the same way Greece and Macedonia are having EU-related issues, and same with NATO, Slovenia had the same thing with Croatia because of a border dispute, not because of a name dispute. Fun fact, Slovenia, by the way, probably one of the loveliest countries in Europe, would 100% recommend, very much loved it. I met, just fun fact for every country here, I met a stranger in Ljubljana that was very, very, very nice once. He said he was a university professor, and he taught me a lot of things about the EU, so maybe he was, or maybe he was a crazy man, who knows for sure. Either way, he spoke good English. So with that said, let's move into the next country, which is going to be Hungary. So Hungary is Budapest is probably, I mean, almost just as famous as Hungary the country. But I wanted to talk about Hungary because if you look back to that map from earlier, you'll notice how Hungary is on the floating currency list because they have their own currency, the Hungarian forint, which means of all EU member countries and even EEA member countries, they actually have the lowest value currency per unit that exists. So if I show you right now, we got 100 euros here, which I showed off earlier. Don't question why I have this, by the way, just reasons. And I have 500 Hungarian forints. Which do you think is worth more? And I guess, obviously, the answer is, like, the 100 euros, right? But the difference in value is actually quite shocking, because if I then made the same question with this 2 euro coin and this 500 Hungarian forint, the answer is still the euro coin, because the Hungarian forint at one point, again, not too recently, but like basically, long story short, having a low valued per currency unit isn't a bad thing. That's just it means historically something might have gone bad, and Hungary has historically had inflation problems. In fact, one of the biggest hyperinflations. But it just means that, and in fact, having a low value currency is good for some countries, like Iceland, which has almost as low a value one. But the lowest per currency unit is the Hungarian forint, which is currently worth about, I want to say it's like less than 2 euros, about €1 like 60 for a 500 Hungarian forint note, which is cool because you get to feel rich if you go to Hungary. Go to Hungary, go feel rich, I guess. Next up, we've got Slovakia. So Slovakia, everyone's second favorite half of Czechoslovakia, or first favorite if you like. Anyway, with that said, I just realized that was like a derogatory thing to say. I'm sorry, Slovakians, I love you. So anyway, with that out of the way, Slovakia is an interesting EU member state because their capital is one of the closest to a land border with another country anywhere really in the world. If you look, it's literally there. You can walk from Bratislava into Austria if you want to. Wouldn't really recommend it. They've got fast trains. But I mean, if you're so inclined, you can do that. The other interesting thing about Slovakia is the fact that they are in terms of like per capita, in terms of as a percentage of their like industry, 40% of their industry is cars. If you're a European car manufacturer, one, I don't know why you're watching this video, and two, you probably have a factory in Slovakia because it's got the interesting mixture of low wages but also decent living conditions. In fact, 90% of people own their house there, one of the highest in the world. Only second in the EU, actually, to Romania, and only third in the world to Singapore, which, you know, separate stuff. So with that said, next we've got Czechia. Czechia is everyone's first favorite part of Czechoslovakia. Or it might be your second. I don't know you or your preferences. But yeah, Czechia is one of the most interesting countries because it's technically Central Europe. It's this actually place where the whole Central Europe or Eastern Europe thing comes in most important. And let me just answer the debate once and for all. Is Czechia Central Europe or Eastern Europe? It's both. Eastern Europe means former communist country. On the other side of the what's that wall called? The Iron Curtain. I get confused with the Berlin Wall. But the Iron Curtain obviously is down right now, but it still refers to the kind of big divide between, you know, the former Eastern Europe and current Western Europe. If you want to include Czechia in Eastern Europe, you have to also include Eastern Germany. If you don't include Eastern Germany, if you include all of Germany as being Western Europe, then you can include Czechia as Central Europe. Same with Poland, same with Slovakia, same with Hungary. There you go. Easy solution. That's the Central Eastern thing done. It's just I don't know why people get that the way, find that to be such a hard thing. Also, fun fact about Czechia is their capital, Prague. Interestingly enough to me, I found it hugely fascinating, is in the same way that, you know, every Western European, you know, country has a huge, like, let's say, Asian, like, interest. Like, a lot of Asian people come around, and they enjoy seeing the thing. It's, you know, Europe has a lot of tourists. However, Prague has a surprising amount, one of the largest amounts in Eastern Europe, and because of that, if you want to fly to Asia, or from Asia to Europe, Prague is often one of your best bets to do it cheaply, or to do it, you know, interestingly enough, actually. And yeah, if you want to go to Prague, by the way, which I totally recommend, even if you are an Asian viewer watching this, is the Charles Bridge, because the Charles Bridge, which I totally didn't just go to the wrong bridge right there. The Charles Bridge is one of the most beautiful bridges in the world. Even though, okay, so this is what everyone will tell you what it looks like, and you want to go really early in the morning if you want it to actually look like this, because everyone has the dream of seeing this bridge. In fact, I want to say there's races across it, and like Forza and stuff like it. There are races. It's a cool bridge. It's beautiful. One of the best looking bridges in the world. In fact, bridges with Toy Cat, best bridge goes to Czechia. However, if you want to actually see it, you have to go super early or super late, because if you go at any other time, this is what it, if you go any other time, I said, this is what it will actually look like. Pretty much anyone who, this is what it will actually, I mean, that's the entrance to the bridge. This is what it will actually look like. This is the Charles Bridge. It is just, it's a nightmare. It's the same, you know, it's a common thing where, like, people ruin most good things, right? I mean, that's a common opinion. And the Charles Bridge, you don't want it to be ruined by people. Go early. Tourism advice with Toy Cat, look at that. Poland, everyone knows Poland, right? I think simple enough to say. Poland is in the EU. It's Polish. It's one of the largest members in terms of population. And rather than talking about anything like tragic or sad, why not talk about, interestingly enough, the fact that they have a very good relationship with the US, and partially this because of a lot of Polish people in the US. But if you look at total number of visits to a European country by a US president since the end of the Cold War in 1991, you can see how, funnily enough, all Western European powers, besides Spain, are about the same. For some reason, US isn't a big fan of Spain. And then Poland's right there, over there with 10. You know, it's the fifth most besides, obviously including Russia. And I just find that fascinating that the US and Poland, in the same way that I just mentioned, like Czechia and Asia, there's that link. The US and Poland, again, a surprising connection in lots of different ways that maybe you weren't aware of. Or maybe you were aware of, but now you're extra aware of it, because we're going to move on to Lithuania, which is, I think it's notable for, it's our first example of a former USSR republic, and I really wanted to give a fact about Lithuania itself, so I'm very sorry to anyone who is offended that this is my fact, but there are a lot of, Lithuania has a, you know, proportionate to their population, which is around about 2 million, there is a lot of Lithuanians in the United Kingdom, and I know a lot of Lithuanians, have a lot of Lithuanian friends, think it's a great thing, and my fun fact, it's a terrible one, but I may have been, not sober one time, may have run across a Lithuanian, may have misheard that they're from Luxembourg, and went on a huge rant about how, like, it's barely a country. So there you go, fun fact, I once mistook a Lithuanian for a Luxembourger, and then insulted, I don't even strongly believe that I hate Luxembourg, but that time, I let that Lithuanian know about it, and there you go, there's my most embarrassing moment I've ever had. Hope you all enjoyed it. Let's move into Latvia, because Latvia is the fastest shrinking country in the EU. It's sometimes tied to Bulgaria. But they're one of the very few countries in the world that has a population lower now in 2018 than they had in 1950, which is kind of depressing. However, Latvia's a happy, fun country, and you should go anyway. So with that, there's more real estate for everyone now that it's all. There's less people there. So with that said, let's move into Estonia, because Estonia, although there's a billion Estonian things we could talk about, Estonia, I find one of its most interesting characteristics is the Valka thing that happened, because when the USSR, one country. So this wasn't an issue, having a village split between two administrative units. You just lived on one side and it wasn't really a big problem. When the two countries became independent, they had to enforce a border control, which meant that, of course, having a border down the middle of a village created a whole bunch of logistical nightmares, and there's not even many connections to this day, just because of that. They had a full-on border fence going through the town. However, it's 2018 and they unsealed the border, and it's one of the interesting examples of, like, I think it both is terrible and also a good example of how at the borders of countries, like having less borders is a really good thing, because it just means you can move back and forth better. It also kind of means, though, that, like, seeing this and seeing that, like, when both countries join the Schengen area, having borders blur so seamlessly that people can live in basically a different country and not really notice it, is something that isn't necessarily a stated desire for the EU, but kind of happens, especially in the border regions, and that you can kind of notice, like, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Make your own judgment, but at least, be vaguely informed about it. So that brings us to the end of the 2004 enlargement. So every other enlargement is super kind of small compared to that. If you look at the 1995 enlargement, same year I was born, fun fact, you actually see that there are 3 countries joined the EU, and the reason they joined in 1995 is they wanted to join before, but it was incompatible with their neutrality. So what 3 countries in Europe are neutral, you might be asking? Well, I mean, there's more, but which 3 couldn't join till then? Austria, Sweden, and Finland. That's right. If we look at a map of Europe and we look at a map of NATO, the light green is countries that are in both, because there are a lot of EU members and there's a lot of NATO members, and most NATO members are in the EU. Most EU members are in NATO, but there's 4 EU members not in NATO. There's Ireland, there's Austria, there's Sweden, and there's Finland. And the reason that they're neutral and could only join in 1995 is because during the Cold War, joining the EU was seen as like jumping on one side rather than the other. And given that, again, all 3 countries had kind of deals not to do that, they figured not a cool thing to do. After the Cold War's over, yeah, have a party, join the EU, I guess. And yeah, so Austria, fun fact about Austria is that it's neutral and in the EU, and Vienna is a huge proportion of its population. You don't even realize it's often ranked as the most livable city in the world. And if you like Vienna and you like livable cities, then go Austria, I guess. Although a lot of people not from Vienna don't like Vienna and Viennese people. So there you go. Next up, we have the fact that Finland is the only Nordic, Scandinavian, / Nordic country not to have like its own krone currency. It used to have, I believe, its own currency until it joined the EU. I mean, of course it did. I was going to say the crown, but I wasn't quite sure on that one. But yeah, the interesting thing about Finland is that it has the euro, the only one of the Nordic countries to have that. And because of having the euro, partially, they have cheaper prices than the other Nordic countries. So yeah, only Nordic country in the Eurozone. The Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland all have the crown system in place, despite being part of the EU/EEA. So there you go. Fun fact, Finland, out there being a rebel, not doing that. So Sweden does have its own currency, and intends to keep it that way for as long as it humanly can. So, fun fact for you right there. And yeah, Sweden, great country. Everyone loves Sweden, right? I've gone over my love of Sweden too many times to do it in this video. So let's move into the previous wave of expansion, because if you take away the 28th, that brings you down to 27, take away these 2, 25, take away the next 10, you got 15, then we take away another 3, we got 12, which was the last couple of members to join, Spain and Portugal. So Spain and Portugal's reason for not being able to join the EU, because they wanted to, again, with most countries, it's kind of like, yeah, we want to do that because of the trade benefits. It goes without saying, I was going to say in this video, mention every country why they wanted to join, and Spain and Portugal, yeah, they wanted to join for economic benefits, but the reason they couldn't join for so long was because one of the requirements is a democracy, and both countries had military dictators, which are, same with Greece, by the way, which I just find a little bit odd, right? So yeah, I mean, obviously, it's like a commonly known thing these days, but yeah, Spain couldn't join, and then they got rid of their dictator, and then they could join. And you know what they did? They joined. Same with Portugal. And the great thing about Spain and Portugal joining at the same time, making it, the EU 12 at that point, is the fact that when they both joined, the border between them also got abolished. In the same way it happened with Latvia and all the other 10 countries, which makes the very interesting point that, yeah, Spain and Portugal could properly cross over. A lot of border towns where there's a bit of mixture going on were very happy. And yeah, Spain and Portugal very close brothers in some ways, very distant brothers in other ways, were kind of together, and isn't that a nice side effect somewhat? So with that said, let's move on to the expansion before that, because Greece joined by itself. Like I said before, not many countries joined by themselves. Greece is one of the exceptions, and Greece is a really interesting exception. They couldn't join because they had a military dictator. Got rid of the military dictator, and then they could join by themselves. But like I mentioned before, where the gap was only fixed in like 2007, if you look at a map of the EU, when it was, like when all of Eastern Europe wasn't in there, it was just this weird thing where it's like, Greece is just chilling over there, doing its own thing. Part of the EU, I guess. And yeah, Greece is one of the countries where the EU is often said to have done the baddest, like the Euro, I guess, in particular, is often said to have done the worst to the country. And despite the fact of that, I mean, the reality is they're kind of stuck with it, right? You can't just say to your country, like, oh yeah, we're going to get rid of the currency that, has to be kept at a certain value. We're going to go to the one that we can devalue. And Greece lied to get into the Euro and the EU, which is, or lied is a debatable term, which does have its whole own set of things attached to it. And yeah, Greece is a weird situation that you've all heard something about. So let's talk about a way more fun fact, because Mount Athos, if you're not familiar with Mount Athos, it's my favorite just weird little fun fact, but there's a autonomous territory within Greece that only men are allowed to enter. It's just because it goes back thousands of years, and it's like, nowadays you can't make a country only men can enter. But guess what? It's a man-only autonomous part of Greece, and they're not part of the EU for a bunch of different reasons. There's no VAT there, and you could argue it's sexism that the only part of Greece there's no VAT is one only men can get to, but it is a fun little fact. And I just love tiny things like that, just because, someone out there can get mad about that, and I kind of want you to, Go be mad at the island where only men can avoid VAT. I love beautiful little nuggets like that. So speaking of things that are beautiful little nuggets, I found this interesting and couldn't find much of a truth behind it, because in so we've gone back from EU 10 to EU 9 now. The 9 EU countries we have right now are the 6 original founders and the 3 that joined first, which was actually interesting enough. Despite the UK's long history of being anti-EU, they were actually the first country to join, or one of the first 3 countries to join, because the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Denmark all wanted to join the European community, back in the 70s. So what happened? What went wrong there? Basically, actually, they applied to join before that, but they were rejected by France. And the reason that the UK got rejected, and then Ireland and Denmark got rejected, and Ireland got rejected because so Ireland and the UK very closely. A lot of Irish people are going to find this offensive. But the truth is, Ireland and the UK are economically quite integrated. Ireland, a lot of it relies on the UK, less so these days. The UK, some of it relies on Ireland. It's like a true factor behind that. But Denmark felt like it was in the same boat, where they're like, we're close enough linked to the UK economy that if the UK joins the EC, we're just going to have to do it too. So yeah, all 3 countries tried to join when the UK tried to join in its first attempt. Charles de Gaulle, Frenchman, very suspicious of British people, was like, no, it's a backdoor to letting America into the EU, which, funnily enough, did shape some later policies. But yeah, at the time, they got vetoed, then they got vetoed again, and then finally they could join the EU. And when they did decide to join, Ireland and Denmark joined with them, making it the EU 9. So this was an expansion of 3 countries. It was adding 50% to the size of the EU. It grew, a half overnight. And yeah, let's talk about the 3 countries, because Denmark has the oddest arrangement with the EU in terms of their currency. I mentioned how, all the Nordic countries keep their own crown, and Denmark is the only country which is allowed to do that kind of in perpetuum. They have a currency pegged to the euro, as you see right here, and they've done so for a very long time, but they don't intend, and because they got an opt-out from the treaty. But the interesting thing is, if you're not going to have the euro, keeping your currency pegged to the euro seems like a really odd thing to do. The big benefit of having a currency of your own is you can float it. You can have it go up and down in value to benefit your country when it works out. But Denmark doesn't do that, and maybe the big benefit is one day they could. But yeah, Denmark keeps a currency. They have the legal right that even in 50 years, when every EU country is meant to have joined the euro, Denmark won't have had to, and they'll just have a currency that vaguely floats alongside it. I find that weird. Also, this is fascinating stuff to me, but I mentioned before how a lot of Polish people are known for going into Germany for jobs, or for the rest of the EU for jobs. However, a lot of Ukrainians go into Poland, and while Poland's losing people to Germany, Ukraine is losing people to Poland. The interesting thing about this, though, is this kind of goes even further up than you think, because guess what? Let me show you the map of European most common country of origin of foreign-born population. So with that said, this is 2015, fairly recent. The people who are going into, the most common foreign population in Ukraine are from Russia. As you can see, Russians go into Ukraine. Then Ukrainians go into Poland. Then Polish people go into Germany. And then German people go into Denmark. And I'm just saying, there's a revolving door going from East to West Europe that way, which is just hugely fascinating to me. Maybe not to you. There you go, Denmark, fun fact. This video is getting quite long. I'm sorry. There's a lot of things to say about every EU member country. Fun facts. Ireland is a part of the Eurozone, while the UK is not. And this is an interesting thing because it means the island of Ireland has two currencies. Maybe you're aware of that fact. Ireland has the lowest corporation tax in the EU, or the lowest official rate. Maybe you know that fun fact right there. But yeah, the UK, I just wanted to mention it very briefly and say that, interesting enough, it's common, thought that the EU had a referendum to join the EU. They actually had a referendum on whether they should stay or leave it at the time, 40 years ago. And I'd like to bring that up to people, because a lot of people say, like, oh yeah, well, we had a referendum at one point, now we can never have a referendum on that same subject. And it's like, that referendum was the future one. If your belief on referendums, because, I'm quite anti the idea of, I think, direct democracy has its flaws, to say the least. But, when you're like, okay, so we can have one referendum on any given subject, we can never have a reversal one, because that's a bad idea. But it's like, you're reversing the one we had 40 years ago. And if you're saying, well, that's because things changed, it's like, well, yeah. It's one of those interesting things where we've had two referendums on the same issue in the UK, but, everyone's like, oh, you can't have a third, because then you might have a fourth. And it's like, well, and that's just the current little thing right there. Little nudge that's going to get someone in the comments angry. But let's talk about the UK and the EU, because the UK has always kind of been this whole separate entity, because it likes the economic benefits, but there's a lot of other stuff that comes with it that is kind of questionable. However, with that said, we're going to move on to the 6 original founders of the EU, because we've got France and Germany. The whole kind of point of the EU was like, going to war with each other really is costing the whole world a lot of money, people, and just everything. Why don't we not go to war, Germany, said France. And Germany said, how about we don't go to war, France? And then they said, yeah, let's do that together. Maybe we could make our coal and steel industries interlinkable so that war would be unthinkable. That's the official quote. Yeah, let's do that. How about we get some other countries on board? And Luxembourg, Belgium, Netherlands, and Italy all got on board with it. Like, yeah, let's all have the same coal and steel market, and then eventually expanded, so on and so forth. However, I just wanted to mention, because this is the original 6 founders, again, this is another thing that I found interesting, because I mentioned it in a video and then later looked it up, found out I was wrong when I put it in the video, so I corrected said video. But the Declaration for the United States of Europe was said very early on, the Schuman Declaration as it's called, to eventually keep integrating till there is a United States of Europe. That was said very early on in the European Steel and Coal Communities Foundation. So any comments that like, oh yeah, it's just edging that way, kind of secretly, it was stated very much in plain sight. And when the EU got a flag, it was kind of another step towards that. Maybe someone should restate it. Maybe someone should just say in 2018, like, oh yeah, that's our goal someday. But it, technically speaking, isn't a shadowy thing. It's just like, oh yeah, they said it 60 years ago, and then they're just sticking to that thing they said all those years ago. So, fun fact. But let's move into the fun facts about each individual founding country. I guess we'll be very brief on this one, because Germany is the most populated of all the EU member countries. Fun fact for you right there. Belgium has the capital of the EU, and the reason Belgium has the capital is because of a big compromise. Fun fact right there. The Netherlands is below sea level. Fun fact. And Luxembourg is, interestingly enough, the one of the smallest countries in the EU. It's not a micro country, but everyone insists on calling it one, despite having more area than Malta. But let's avoid that for now. But the interesting thing about Luxembourg is the fact that 500 million people almost live in the EU, and 250,000 people live in Luxembourg. The size difference there, but yet the man in charge of the EU is from Luxembourg. A man from a country of that few people rules a union the size of that many. Or not rules, it's a bit more complex than that. I find that fascinating as it's one of the side notes of again, when you have a federation or confederation of any form, something like that tends to happen, but it rubs me the wrong way. It probably rubbed me the wrong way if the largest country, Germany, had the EU president be from there. But still, being rubbed the wrong way, not a good feeling. Would not recommend it. So next up, we'll talk about Italy very briefly, because it is kind of known as the sick man of Europe these days. You don't really appreciate why till you see like different graphs and stats. But let me just show you. Here's a map of all the EU countries, how well they're doing. Wow, Poland's doing great. Czech Republic's doing great, like I mentioned. Hungary's doing great. Oh man, what has happened to Italy down there? And yeah, this is where a lot of the problems with Italy comes from, because when Italy unified, unlike other countries, there's been a huge disparity between North and South, rich North, poor South, that never really ever fixed, and that have gotten worse over time, it seems. So yeah, Italy, real problems with the EU, and France, finally, because I wanted to talk about this one very briefly, because the reason, it's often said, the reason that France and Germany agreed to starting what would become the EU is because Germany liked the economic benefits, France liked the political ones. They wanted to be the political rulers, that's why French was the working language for so long, and so on, and that's why Strasbourg still has part of the European working there. They generally do take trains from Strasbourg to Brussels every week, by the way. It's a whole weird thing. But yeah, the interesting thing about France, in my opinion, is not just the fact that they like the political kind of idea in that sense, but it's the fact that France has the largest European Union constituency by distance between it. And in case you're curious, the European Union has different parliament constituencies, usually to the country itself. So for instance, the UK is divided into NUTS regions. There's like an East region, a Southeast region. Wales is one whole constituency. Scotland is a whole constituency, so on and so forth. Because they're larger, there's more people per MEP. Interestingly enough, Germany has one country as their whole constituency. France does divide itself into regions, and then they have one of their regions being this. This is a French European parliamentary constituency, ignoring France itself. It is all of these islands, every single one of them. If you live in any of them, that's one European constituency. And this obviously, like, how the big argument for like having constituencies and having local representatives is like they can talk about local issues. I'm just saying, if you live on Clipperton Island, or you live on Mayotte, or you live in the Reunion, and if someone from French Guiana is representing you, they probably don't have your interests. I'm just being honest. And I know, fun fact for you right there. All of this, all part of the same French European parliamentary constituency. It's known as the outer regions because, again, I've gone over this before. France considers most of its territory to be in the EU. There you go. Fun facts with Toycat. Hope you all enjoyed the video talking about the EU and every single country within it. I don't like getting into the debate of like, oh, is the EU good or bad? Because again, I think the issue really is just like, do you prefer bigger federations or do you prefer smaller countries? And most people would decide, smaller countries, they're generally more successful, right? And it's like, well, what are the benefits to a large country? And it's like, oh yeah, we're having a large country, especially if it's the largest one, like the USA. Like, any argument that you can use to say, like, I find this interesting, any argument you can use to say, oh yeah, EU should be smaller member states individually, there shouldn't be a union. It's like, well, shouldn't the US be individual, states? Because, a lot of Euroscepticism comes from there, and it's like, oh, no, that's different. Or like, okay, what about, Russia or China? From a European perspective, it would be good if Russia split up into individual states, or China did the same, or if the US did the same, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea from their perspective all the time. It's just, I don't know, my point here is just, if you think there's an objective yes or no answer to any question regarding the EU, it's really not. It's such a messy, in the weeds subject, and that's why all of these facts are important to help you decide that, you hate the EU now, that's fine. If you think that all the things I mentioned, like, oh yeah, well, I think that the blurring of borders is a problem because national identity is a good thing. Having distinct cultures, really great thing. I agree with you, sure. If you think that like, oh yeah, but the security collective, the fact that all of those Eastern European countries joined and it kind of kept them safer from Russia, that's good too. Sure, there we go, there's security things too. You can have this debate back and forth, but it really just comes down to, in the end, like, what priorities you value more. Is it economics or the safety or whatever that generally come with a large country, or is it the different economics, let's call it, and the independence and the self-determination or whatever that comes with a smaller country? There's big benefits in every single situation, and I just find that interesting personally, and that's why I don't have a hugely defined all the way on the left, all the way on the right opinion. I know those are the videos that are popular on YouTube, the people that slate it or love it and go pro it, but it's not that simple. It's not, and when people try to tell you that it is, they're really just trying to get you passionately on their side. Because it's not usually a developed opinion. But with that said though, hope you all enjoyed the video. Let me know if you want to see any more EU related videos, because I actually found this one quite fun to talk about for 38 minutes, 39 minutes. So yeah, I'm going to end it now, but I'll see you all in the next video. Second channel, don't care. Oh wait, no, this is important. I'm going to Bangkok, Thailand And what I like to do when I go somewhere, because I have subscribers all over the world, if you are in Bangkok, Thailand, or if you just have advice you feel like throwing my way, send it to me, ibx2cat@gmail.com. I'm going in a week and a half. Yep, in a week and a half. So go check me out in Thailand. Send me a thing about Thailand if you live there and you want to show me it or whatever. Let me know that too, and hopefully we could do some of that. And you might see a video from Thailand. In fact, you will see a video from Thailand, hopefully. So it's gonna be fun. Anyway, with that said, second channel, don't care. Goodbye.